"We're lost!" exclaimed Jack, with a nervous frustration. "Come on," said Jenny, with authority. "Keep it together in front of the kids." As they pushed on, they entered a small clearing. Jack felt they were more exposed than before, as they ventured warily through until Jack stopped dead. He half turned back and gestured to Jenny and the others not to join him where he was. The scene Jack was saving them from witnessing was one he wished he'd avoided. The bodies, or what remained of the bodies, of Tyler and Freddie. They were strewn across a small pit covered in small scraps of coloured material scattered everywhere, most doused with blood. Their faces were mostly intact, but their bodies were shredded like their clothes, and they were both missing limbs. Pools of blood matted the ground, and the cold peat glistened a deep maroon because of it. Jack wanted to be sick. He had never seen so much human devastation in one place before. Just hours ago he had been tucking them both up in bed, and now they were leftovers from a monster's supper. Jenny emerged behind him, and he heard her suppress a scream as she peered over his shoulder. "We must be in its lair," whispered Jenny, looking all around her nervously, scanning the trees for signs of movement. "If we're here, and it's not, then it'll come back. We have to get out of here," said Jack quickly. At that moment, they heard the ominous low growl again. They looked around for it. The kids started to scream in panic. "Run this way!" yelled Jenny to the kids. They ran towards her, and the 5 of them ran off past the pit of bodies and onto the woods away from the horrible suitor of death. They ran into the darkness, following the now severely dimmed light of Jack's torch. They were all screaming as they ran blindly into the forest, the children following Jack and Jenny as best they could. They could hear the padding of gigantic heavy paws behind them, getting closer and closer. They were dodging through trees and over roots, running as fast as they could. The growl got closer, and the paws thudded the ground louder behind them. Little Ben was really struggling to keep up with Jack's torchlight, and in that moment lost concentration and tripped over a root. His body thumped heavily against the hard ground and winded him as he lay face down in the trampled ground. He let out a scream that echoed round the trees as the creature sunk its enormous teeth into his torso and picked him up like a rag doll in his mouth. Jack and Jenny swiveled round immediately, and seeing what was happening, Jack sprang into action, waving his torch at the hellish fiend. For the first time, everyone was still, and the group were able to gaze upon their tormentor as it was transfixed by Jack's frantic flame. It was a huge black cat, more like a panther, but bigger than any Jack had ever seen in a zoo or on TV. Its eyes were the size of coasters and were endless black pits of hate as they stared back at him. Both man and beast froze momentarily, both are wary of each other's weapons. The moment felt like a lifetime, but soon the wild waving of the torch put out the flame, and as soon as the darkness returned, the creature sprang away with little Ben clamped between its mighty jaws. There was stunned silence from the group. They were terrified, and the giant cat had now taken 4 children. There were just the 2 girls left, Abby and Hannah. The girls were both weeping with terror. Jenny cuddled them up and told them it would be okay. They would get out alive. Now they knew what they were up against. They could potentially fight back. They took a minute to try and find light. Jack's phone was now dead, but he hoped someone would have heard the screaming. They had to keep hope. Abby found a torch at the bottom of her bag, so they used it to try and figure out where they were. Jack was sure he could recognize their location from their trek earlier, and determined that they weren't far from the road. They started to make their way again in the direction Jack thought would lead them to safety. Jack made a mental note that if they came across it again, they would wave the torch in its face as much as they could, and they may get a chance to get away. They had a girl each clinging onto their hands as Jack tried to concentrate on getting them out of the woods. Jenny's father had now reached the woods in his truck. He hurriedly parked it and headed for the area Jenny had described to him yesterday. He knew the woods well. He had taken Jenny there a lot as a child and often came out with Jack recently, as his father wasn't around to enjoy his hobbies with him. Armed with a powerful torch, axe, and a few knives, he strode through the woods searching for signs of disturbance, determined to reach them before that horrible creature did. He was analysing his surroundings when he heard screaming from off in the distance. He could hear Jenny's amongst them. He ran as fast as he could in the direction of the screams, axe aloft. He ran silently so as not to alert the beast to his arrival, also so he could focus on the direction of the screams. He was getting closer, but the screams were becoming fewer. Suddenly, he saw some light and thought he saw movement. He swiftly changed direction and ran towards the flashpoint. He chased down the area where the light was coming from. At this point, he turned his torch on to help him get there quicker. And what met his eyes when he got there shook him to his very core. The bodies of two little girls were hanging out of the trees, their mangled limbs catching in the branches. Blood was dripping down from the gaping cuts all over their bodies. It was gruesome. He made sure that he didn't go under the shower of plasma from on high. His eyes fell to the base of the tree where Jack sat hunched over. He cast his torch beam over him and saw that one of his arms had been ripped off, and he was losing blood quickly. He rushed towards him and saw that he was still breathing, so he took off his jacket and wrapped it round the wound on the stump of his arm. He looked around everywhere for Jenny, but couldn't see her or anyone else. He could have sworn that Jenny said there were more children on the trip, but that wasn't his concern at that moment. He needed to find Jenny. He kept silent but wanted to call out for her. He started scanning the trees with his torch beam looking for her. Then he saw something out of the corner of his eye. He swung his torch beam round to get a better look at it. It rested on an enormous, sleek, black feline as it climbed effortlessly down from the tree that it had just decorated with corpses. The whole time its eyes were fixed on him. He held onto the axe and torch tightly. He could see that it was gearing up to lunge itself at him. He just needed to make sure he didn't meet the same fate as the unfortunate souls around him. He knew the first move would be the most crucial. The giant panther burst forward, springing off the tree trunk. As he leapt towards him, Jenny's father flung himself to the ground, holding his axe high above him strongly with both arms. The panther's hind legs clipped his shoulder as he landed just short of him, but the axe made contact and had sliced down its left flank. The panther let out a roar as the injury inflicted on him knocked him off his balance, and it rolled over once on the damp ground before making its way to its feet again. Jenny's father rolled over onto his front to see where his attacker had landed and how bad the damage he'd caused was. He winced as he rolled over his freshly struck shoulder, but forgot about it in an instant as he saw that the panther was staring at him from no more than 6 feet away. It was readying itself for another attack. He jumped up to his feet and readied his axe to strike again. He directed the torch beam in the great cat's face to try and blind him. This seemed to work at first, but didn't stop the panther from attacking him. It lunged forward, less powerfully this time, as he was clearly suffering from the axe wound on its flank, but it was still an animal twice the size of him. The beast knocked the torch out of his hand as it went crashing into the ground. The light was extinguished. He was now at a disadvantage, as he could see barely anything. There were patches of moonlight breaking through the tree's canopy, which cast a faint light around the area, but it took a minute for his eyes to adjust. In that time, the panther struck again. He only saw it coming at the last minute, as its white teeth caught the moonlight inches from his face, and he dived to his right to dodge him. The panther span round, but before he could launch another attack, Jenny's father brought the axe down near the giant beast's head. He made contact, but it wasn't clear straight away how much. The great cat howled with pain and sped off into the darkness, howling as it went. He had wounded it again, but clearly not fatally. It was gone now, and hopefully it wouldn't be bothering him again for some time. He started yelling out for Jenny, his voice fraught from the fight, but he tried to keep it as strong as possible for his daughter's sake. He strode around the trees, peering into the darkness, now with only the light from his phone to help him. After a few minutes, he heard a meek-sounding voice coming from a hollow in a large oak tree. He rushed over to the hollow and peered inside. The light from his phone lit up the inside of the tree, and a crouched, frightened figure recoiled from the light. It was Jenny. She still had the t-shirt wrapped round the wound on her shoulder, and she had bruising on her face. "Jenny, thank God I found you. Are you okay?" He put his arm out for her to help her out of the tree. She slowly clambered out, shivering, looking around her nervously. "It's gone, darling," reassured her father. He put his arm around her and they walked towards the body of Jack, still hunched at the base of the tree. He sat her down next to him and told her to make sure he kept breathing, and said he was going to call for help. His phone had no signal, so he went to exit the clearing. "Don't leave me alone here," squeaked Jenny after her father. "I won't ever again, my love." And he went and sat down next to her and Jack, and cradled his daughter in his arms. She rested her head against his broad chest and felt safe again. Jenny's father knew that that thing was still out there, but he had done it some damage, so hopefully it wouldn't be coming back. He held his phone aloft and blessedly got a signal. He rang the emergency services straight away and explained the situation. 20 minutes later, the sirens became clear in the distance. Jenny startled suddenly from her slumber in her father's arms. He stroked her hair and whispered softly, "Don't worry, my love. It's over now." And she settled back into his arms, relief washing over her.